sitting at NOAA's Arctic Research Program. I'm currently acting as secretariat for the Arctic data subteams, as well as the modeling and observing subteams. I've been doing this for about a year now, and with any luck, I'll be sticking around in some capacity over the next couple of months. So working on my contract now. So I'll turn it over to, we'll start with Bruce. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ruth Doerr. I'm with the Ronan Institute for Independent Scholarship, and I lead an affiliated group called the Vocabularies and Semantics Working Group that's under SCADM and SAON and IARPC. And I apologize, Jonathan, that I missed the last couple of these telecons because I've usually been a regular attendee, but I had conflicts.
No worries, Bruce. Bill, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Bill Manley at the University of Colorado INSTAR, and I'm involved with the Arctic Research Mapping Application and the Arctic Observing Viewer, and I'm just as sick as a dog right now.
No. Oh no, I hope you feel better.
Coronavirus. Thank you.
And I'm Jonathan Blythe, co-lead for this team, and I work with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I'm currently on detail in the Department of the Interior's Office of the Chief Information Officer for the next several months, and just trying to carry things on. And I think later I will introduce Mike Brady, who's our new co-lead. Should I go ahead and do that?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead, and then we'll hit people in the NGA room there.
Okay. Yeah. So, Mike, I'm going to introduce you now. So, and give Mike a chance to kind of talk about himself. So, Mike is a cartographer in NGA's Maritime Safety Office. He's a former Coast Guard and has a PhD in geography from Rutgers University, a BA and Masters of Arts also in geography from Hunter College and the City University of New York. Mike, we're not well acquainted, so why don't you just say a few things about yourself and what you hope to get from being a co-lead of this team.
Sure, great, thank you. First, we'll just do a quick go around in this room, and I'll go ahead and talk a bit about myself. Rachel, do you want to?
Hi, I'm Rachel Bernstein. I'm in NGA Research.
I'm Sebastian Curcio. I'm also in NGA Maritime Safety Office, and I'll be talking a little bit later.
Hi, I'm Jim Dunlap. I'm in NGA Research as well, and I'm mostly a physical chemist with an environmental background.
All right, so that's the NGA team for today, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a bit about my background. Really excited to join this group. I feel like it's fitting for me to tell you a little bit about my research interests. I'll keep it high level and brief. I don't want to get into the weeds at this point, but I hope to kind of weave this into some of these calls as much as I can and as appropriate. So I'm an environmental geographer. I'm interested in co-developing geographic information systems with coastal stakeholders to understand coastal change impacts on local communities and to communicate the impacts with decision makers and the broader public for land use decision support. So, just remind everyone, the data team is the sub-team of the environmental intelligence team, and this kind of research interest that I have is co-developing with users of GIS products is kind of one of the goals of this understanding is to support decision making, which is a major aspect of, or central theme of the environmental intelligence working group that we support. So I hope to weave some of that in as much as possible. At Rutgers, where I did my doctorate, I collaborated with Alaska's North Slope Borough and its residents to co-produce a coastal risk geographic information system that was funded by the National Science Foundation. And I continue to work on publishing that research on my own time, but this is not what I do at NGA. It's not my official duties. I have to make that very clear. At NGA, my main job is to produce nautical charts, and I have responsibilities in parts of the Arctic outside of the United States. In general, the Maritime Safety Office here focuses its charting efforts outside of the U.S. NOAA handles U.S. waters. So in addition to hands-on nautical charting, I am also what the agency calls a strategic engagement representative, where I currently assist with developing U.S. and international partnerships for the agency's statutory safety navigation mission, of which the Maritime Safety Office is a part. So in this capacity, I currently assist NGA's Senior Authority for Maritime to co-develop U.S. positions on international maritime charting issues. This is done in collaboration with NOAA, Navy, and the Department of State. So I have a lot of efforts that are related to this group as part of my strategic, kind of broad strategic engagement representative work role. Try to weave that as much as I can into this group. One example, and something I hope to kind of expand on as we go forward, is currently and have been for a couple of years now, working with private industry and the International Hydrographic Organization on releasing global ship traffic information to the public via the IHO's or International Hydrographic Organization's web-based GIS. And this is going to be leveraging spaceborne automatic identification system, or otherwise known as AIS data. So that's kind of one of these AIS, one of these cross-cutting issues. It's a good kind of case study for data sharing and all this kind of spatial data infrastructure that we're going to be talking about today. So as far as plans and vision for supporting this group, I'm very much going to be in learning mode over the next couple of months, learning from Jonathan and others to identify like where I can add value and also support NGA's mission. So NGA's Maritime Safety Office actively supports marine spatial data infrastructure development. And this is one agency effort that I hope to kind of bring into this group and advance it a bit. And we invited NGA's, I would say, subject matter expert of spatial data infrastructures, Sebastian Carricio. He's a guest speaker today. So I hope that's a good way to kick off this conversation. And in general, I look forward to supporting this team and learning with everyone as I go. So is that good, Jonathan?
Yeah, and I think I can motivate the guest speaker, because I had questions about spatial data infrastructures, but I think we have something else in between. So shall we briefly introduce IARPC to the team? I think most
Sure. I was going to let the couple of others who had joined us since then introduce themselves, if that's all right
sure.
with you guys. So Kelsey, thanks for joining us. Would you please introduce yourself to the group? You might be on mute, Kelsey. All right, we'll turn to Dennis. Would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, he just dropped off. Strange. Okay.
Oh, never. Yeah, I think we can move forward with the rest of the agenda.
Okay. So for folks who aren't familiar with IARPC, I have a terrible background in this. I can't enlighten you much except to let you know my involvement for the past year or so. I've been the co-lead, and we're lucky now to have Mike Brady join me as co-lead of this team. And the focus of the Arctic Data Collaboration Team is primarily focused on our around these performance elements that were developed for us in the previous strategic plan. And that's a 5-year plan that's wrapping up, I think this year or next year. So over the next year or so, we'll be writing some more strategic plan elements. But included in those is there's one in particular for mapping that I think that Mike Brady, in his capacity as working with charts for NGA, can inform, even though his focus is international. Very much important to have that expertise and perspective. And my background more is in the typical data management realm, non-geospatial, even though I dabble in geospatial. And my scientific background is more in oceanography. So I think the two of us complement each other. And, you know, we're always interested in engaging with the community and what your interests are, as well as these performance elements. So I don't think it shouldn't be you know, this team should be familiar to most of the people on the call. So I don't think I have to get into much more detail than that. Unless, Mike, you want to add something about the team?
So I should highlight that I am a social scientist. I know there's a lot of environmental physical scientists that participate here. Something that's important to me is working as close as possible with physical scientists. I do, you know, have observed in my brief academic career that there tends to be kind of a tendency to not interact as much as the different disciplines should. And I'm kind of the, you know, oftentimes the crazy guy in the group. Like, I spend a lot of time around physical scientists. So I think, you know, a lot of value can be added there. Something I hope to bring into this meeting is trying to allow different perspectives to come to fore and helping facilitate and structure some conversations that come in the, you know, following these presentations. Just to kind of be the facilitator to get people to kind of reach across disciplines. That's kind of what I've been doing for many years. And I hope to kind of trickle some of that into these conversations. So look out for that. And I do, you know, early on in all this, I am familiar with the 5-year plan, our 5-year plan. I have reviewed, you know, several years. I've been paying attention to these performance elements as a way to structure my own research and align them with national interests. But in these calls, something I think there's areas for improvement is really trying to gravitate towards those performance elements. So that's something you'll see me try to do is kind of guide, not, you know, we don't want to have a narrow-minded conversation, but you want to try to gravitate as much as possible back towards those performance elements. So Kelly and others have great things to report in their report, which I understand goes in some form to Congress. So this is important work, and as much as we can guide that conversation towards those performance areas, the more effective and more accurate and more comprehensive that report can be. So look out for that. Those are some things that I hope to try to contribute to this group.
Okay, so
thanks so much, Mike, and we're really happy to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks for coming on board, Mike. It's a great addition. So to motivate today's topic and presenter, I, in particular, don't have a geospatial background, so with background with you know, common practices, institutions for geospatial data, and I came across this term for spatial data infrastructure. I think it's in the context of FGDC and the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. So looking at those policies and the laws, the Geospatial Data Act of 2018 calls for this. And so in the context of the marine realm and Arctic realm, Mike had identified work that is ongoing at NGA to promote a spatial data infrastructure. And this is a presentation to bring us up to speed with those, provide a high-level overview, and hopefully, so at the end of this, I'll know what the heck spatial data infrastructure is. So, without further ado, I think we can go to that presentation.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So I'm going to briefly introduce Sebastian here. We can move on with the agenda. So we're really lucky to have Sebastian here. He's one of the NGA's star strategic engagement representatives. He's literally traveling around the world regularly. I have no idea how he gets all this traveling done, but he's out there doing spatial data infrastructure development, very proactive, and many other related efforts, including in the Arctic region. So I think we're very fortunate to have pinned him down today. So thank you, Sebastian, for joining us. So Sebastian is a lead technical cartographic analyst in NGA's Maritime Safety Office. He is also vice chair to the International Hydrographic Organization Marine Spatial Data Infrastructures Working Group. He is the chair of the Arctic Regional Marine Spatial Data Infrastructures Working Group and co-chair of the Open Geospatial Consortium Marine Domain Working Group. So lots of working groups, and these are, this is where, rubber hits the road. This is where things happen. practitioners meet, theory and all that. Sebastian has a BA and an MS in geography, both from the University of Delaware. And as the agenda states, he's going to share his work on NGA engagements in spatial infrastructure data development.
Cool.
Take it away.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Dr. Brady, for the intro. And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me speak today. I apologize in advance. Mike just had a taste of this. I'll be using a lot of acronyms, which I will make sure I've noted to define up front. But we're all working with the government or for the government or whatever, so we should all be pretty comfortable with acronyms anyway, so you might feel right at home. But as Dr. Brady said, I'm from the NGA Maritime Safety Office, and over the last few years, I've been leading our office's development and engagement for marine spatial data infrastructures, or MSDI. I'll refer to that a lot. In that capacity, I lead a few working groups, within the International Hydrographic Organization, or IHO, I'll refer to that one as well, Open Geospatial Consortium, or OGC, as well as within an organized body of Arctic hydrographic offices known as the Arctic Regional Hydrographic Commission, or ARHC. So I've also spent the last couple of years as an advisor on the U.S. delegation to the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, or UNGGIM. So all of these organizations have some working group focused on MSDI development. And today I would like to briefly cover NGA's engagement in this open geospatial arena, and hopefully convey to you what the MSDI community is about, and encourage you all and the organizations you all represent to participate however you can. So with that, I think somebody else is controlling the slide. So if you go to the next slide, which is slide 3, it should say, what is a spatial data infrastructure up top?
Yep, I'm controlling it, Sebastian, so just say next when you're ready.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So there's a few definitions out there of a spatial data infrastructure, or SDI, but the simplest one I like to use is the base collection of technologies, policies, and institutional arrangements that facilitate the availability of and access to spatial data. You'll find very similar definitions from the UNGGIM, the IHO, the OGC, and especially from our U.S. National Spatial Data Infrastructure, which is led by the Federal Geographic Data Committee, or FGDC, and that's the lead entity that's legally identified in the U.S. Geospatial Data Act of 2018, which I believe Dennis was speaking a little bit about earlier. So next slide, please. Now, a marine SDI is the same exact idea, but it's focused on the marine input to an SDI. So now the goals of this infrastructure are to promote the discoverability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of marine geospatial data and information. So ultimately, MSDI is trying to get a broader use of marine data among all sectors of society. Not every user needs specifically safer navigation data, products, and services, but more people can benefit from the base data used to make those products and services. And if you just click next, please, it'll highlight just a few words there. So these are kind of those 4 components that I'd like you to keep in mind. And then if you click next again, it should bring you to slide 5. We can basically organize the spatial data infrastructure into 4 pillars, and I have a few example bodies in each here. So starting with policy and governance in the top left corner, being the most challenging component, arguably, which dictates the controls an international organization or government may require on data. Next, we have standards, which emphasizes the unlocking of geospatial data, preferably using open or non-proprietary or widely used standards, such as those from IHO or OGC, as I have an example here. And then we have information systems and technology, which encompasses the hardware, software, and the system components, and ultimately the data and the metadata itself, comprising the content and the information to be made accessible and usable by the MSDI. So my office, as well as NOAA's Office of Coast Survey, are 2 example providers of hydrographic data. And I should mention that both of our offices are sourcing data and information from their partners, U.S. Navy, U.S. Coast Guard, Army Corps of Engineers, NGA, NOAA, and the other military branches and agencies that I just mentioned are in close coordination for everything surrounding safety of navigation and hydrographic data in the U.S. and around the globe. Additionally, the NGA Maritime Safety Office fulfills international obligations in order to support safe navigation. For those reasons and more is why we operate in the open along with our partners regarding developments in marine and maritime geospatial domains. Last thing I'd like to mention about this MSDI graphic on this slide is the organizing of these 4 pillars in particular is the IHO focus. You might see this organized a bit differently between organizations. For instance, the UNGGIM has 9 strategic pathways, but all organizations will capture the same concept represented by these pillars in one way or another. So you'll see this repeated quite a bit. If you go to the next slide, which will be slide 6, about data governance. Good data governance is what we see as the necessity to ultimately get your content available and accessible through a SDI. Basically, this shows a solid data governance model should cover everything from data quality all the way through to the ultimate access. And if you click, there might be a little arrow that shows up saying that it's accounting for user needs, usage analytics, and their feedback to improve the governance model as you continue to use it. All right, next slide. This slide talks a little bit about data-centric production and MSDI. So to touch on data centricity from our office's perspective, hydrographic offices are retaining so much data, but only about 5% make it onto a finished chart product. Their centralized data stores are allowing easier product generation, but that raw data could be used to support other activities in the marine domain and society. So there's so much value in the base data and so much potential for its use that we can really have a bigger effect if we can get that greater access. All right, next slide, please. So this is slide 8. The reason why any of this is relevant to hydrographic offices is that it ultimately elevates our data to the level of visibility being nationally, sorry, do I have the wrong?
7, I think.
Slide 7, maybe? Okay. As long as it says MSDI importance to a hydrographic office, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yep, that's slide 8.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So I think a lot of us, you know, when we're talking about geospatial data and we might be in a similar position when we're talking to people and we tell them about what kind of work we do, you know, the response is usually from those people like, okay, cool, so you do like Google Maps type things and all of that, which always kind of gets me thinking that the majority of people out there are mostly thinking about roads and GPS navigation when they're thinking of geospatial data. So in the collective maritime domain, all hydrographic offices are in a situation where they're trying to get buy-in from potential stakeholders that think in a very similar way. I think few people on the street kind of realize that, you know, 90% of trade happens on the world's oceans, and we're trying to get support for that and other activities by charting across 70% of the world's surface, essentially. So an MSDI approach helps to increase the role of marine and maritime data providers to support broader objectives and a broader user base, which in turn supports the data provider's mission. Okay, next slide. So this little graphic is just trying to show a mind map of connected intergovernmental organizations and subgroups that are all working towards MSDI that NGA is also engaged with. So as I mentioned earlier, I currently vice chair the IHO MSDI working group, which I'll discuss a little bit more in another slide. I lead the Arctic Regional MSDI working group under the Arctic Regional Hydrographic Commission and co-chairing that OGC Marine Domain working group along with 3 co-chairs from industry and government. Additionally, 2 of my colleagues in the Maritime Safety Office, Jim Rogers and Caitlin Johnson, are respectively the president of the Mesoamerican Caribbean MSDI Working Group, or the MSDI-WG, as they call it. And also, Caitlin's the U.S. advisor in the, this one's going to be really long, the UNGGIM's Working Group for Marine Geospatial Information, or as it's simply referred to, the UNGGIMWG-MGI. So another long acronym, but it seems to be, the greater the work that's going on, sometimes the longer the acronym, or vice versa. I don't know, it could go either way. But anyway, NOAA is also a co-chair of that group. So kind of throughout, wherever I have NGA highlighted, you can almost expect that NOAA is there as well. And we're kind of working all of this MSDI together. So while I'm on the slide, I would just like to point out that the OGC Marine Domain Working Group, or the MSDI-WG, is open to anyone with interest in marine geospatial data community. So that's great news to everybody here, because you all can join if you would like to. After this, you can always reach out to me, and I can get you in contact and get you access to the information that we're sharing and looking at. So if you go to the next slide, which will be titled IHO, MSDI, and Regional Hydrographic Commissions. In IHO, the MSDI Working Group, or MSDI-WG, is the high-level group in IHO that monitors national, regional, and international SDI activities. It promotes IHO and other open standards and liaises with other relevant working groups, such as the OGC Marine Domain Working Group and also the UNGGIMWG-MGI. And they also develop MSDI capacity building and training, too. So IHO has also encouraged the arranging of regional hydrographic commissions, or ARHCs, several of which have formally established MSDI working groups to deal with the hydrographic content for an entire multinational region. So very relevant to our group here, ARHC. An example of this is happening here in the Arctic. So if you go to the next slide, entitled ARHC, ARMSDIWG, and Arctic SDI. So for those of you unfamiliar, the Arctic SDI is a cooperation of the national land mapping agencies of the same 8 Arctic nations that are in the Arctic Council. And just as a caveat, Arctic SDI is not part of the Arctic Council, but it aligns its leadership yearly with that of the Arctic Council as the Arctic Council leadership changes. So on the marine side, the Arctic Regional Hydrographic Commission has the Arctic Regional MSDI Working Group, or ARMSDIWG, which is the group I currently lead, and we are working together with Arctic SDI to provide the respective terrestrial and marine foundations in an Arctic regional spatial data infrastructure. So regarding the Arctic Council a bit and kind of where we interface with them, so Arctic SDI interfaces with the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna, or the CAF working group. So they have a contact established with them, and then the ARHC interfaces with the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment, or the PAME working group within the Arctic Council. And so both of our groups align and reference each other whenever we talk to those 2 different working groups under the Arctic Council, so that way they understand that we're both working towards a common thing, which is an Arctic regional spatial data infrastructure. If you go to the next slide, this is basically a conceptualization of our future collaboration structure. We're working towards this kind of system of systems approach where we're reusing data content across the marine domain that already exists and bring them together in a common infrastructure along with all the Arctic terrestrial data services that are provided or facilitated by the Arctic SDI. So this is basically just illustrating, on the marine side over there where you have the ARHC, our working group, and then also the various other working groups we have within there, and the different marine networks that we're connected to through IHO, OGC, and a number of other types of organizations. Next slide, please. So here's a real example of what we're talking about. This is a screenshot of the Arctic SDI GeoPortal, pulling in and reusing a digital gazetteer service, or a digital dictionary, created and maintained by the JEBCO General Bathymetric Chart of the Arctic Oceans Subcommittee on Undersea Feature Names. Another thing that you can see here in the screenshot is also a base map of the what's called the IBCAL, or the International Bathymetric Chart of the Arctic Ocean, and that was something that we also helped facilitate to bring in as kind of that foundational base map within Arctic SDI's GeoPortal. If you go to the next slide, just another practical example of what we're talking about with interoperability and reusability. So this is a screenshot of Canadian ice frequency data hosted in Canada, viewed in a Norwegian tool, and all of this happened while we were in a meeting room in Finland, just within seconds of connecting. And all of that is made possible by OGC web service standards and the interoperability between the systems behind the scenes. But the user doesn't actually care about that stuff. They just want to view and use the data for their practical purposes. So this example might not seem impressive on the surface because people just expect data and they expect it to show up nowadays. But when you understand all that goes into making it possible and to be able to do this across the globe, it's kind of a powerful example of what you can accomplish by standardizing and making systems interoperate. Again, this happens because of the people and the policies, the technologies, the standards, and the data that make up that SDI. It would not be possible without any one of those components missing from the spatial data infrastructure. Go to the next slide. So this slide just talks about a major initiative called the OGC-IHO MSDI-Concept Development Study. And this was conceptualized back in 2017, where IHO member states and OGC Marine Domain Working Group members discussed creating a joint IHO-OGC study that could establish the framework for future development of MSDI. So we wanted to explore some more future activities and look for opportunities related to integration of new and diverse data sources and capabilities, like some of the few that I have listed here on this slide. Next slide, please. So in the summer of 2018, we formally started the MSDI Concept Development Study, or MSDI-CDS, as I'll refer to it. NGA supported this on behalf of the International Hydrographic Organization and its MSDI-focused working groups and work programs. And we progressed to the MSDI-CDS workshop in October 2018, and this was hosted by the U.S. Committee on the Marine Transportation System. And that workshop helped us shape the request for information, or RFI, in February 2018 that got sent out broadly to the international marine community. And those responses were then gathered to help build the final technical report, which was ultimately reviewed by an expert roundtable in March of 2019, and finally drafted into the engineering report as it's published today, that was back in August 2019, which had information provided from 40 global participants from academic, research, industry, and governmental sectors. So if you're interested in this, I encourage you to go to OGC's website and read through the Marine SDI engineering report. It's maybe a little lengthy, at about 90 pages, but you can probably knock it out over a weekend or so. And but we can absolutely share this report with IARPC for sure. You know, we can either provide the link or the document itself if we wanted to share that on the website or post that. But if you're looking for it in the meantime, literally just go to OGC's website, type in Marine or Marine SDI, and this will show up. And if we go to the next slide, this will be kind of my final slide here, the key takeaway. When I give these sort of briefs about MSDI, I basically ask the audience that whenever they hear about marine or maritime data, or if you're thinking about just data, spatial data in general, and you're talking about anything that has to do with the accessibility, discoverability, interoperability, or reusability, to really be thinking about MSDI or spatial data infrastructure. So hopefully that raises a little bit of awareness about what NGA is doing in the international and open space. And if you have any interest in any of these groups or any of these activities and want to know more about you know, ways you can participate in this type of development. You know, the message here is that we totally welcome your participation and partnership in this space, and I certainly welcome you to reach out to me and get in contact with me if this is of interest to you. So with that, I'll conclude and open it up to, I guess, to the roundtable. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much,
Sebastian.
Sebastian.
For sure.
So, Jonathan,
Yeah,
if
so
we're going at the roundtable. Do we want to open with questions or frame the discussion? I'm inclined, we have a short list of people on the phone, so I think giving them an opportunity to voice any immediate questions, it might be a good way to get started. We do have 20 minutes-ish. How are we doing on time there, Kelly?
yeah, plenty of time.
Let's see. Yeah, I think we've got plenty of time.
I see a few things left on the agenda, but I think the discussion here is important. Do you want to start with the phone, just any burning questions, and then maybe get into framing some of the discussion in terms of this particular group and performance areas?
Okay.
Yeah, so any questions on the line?
Hi, this is Ruth. I have a question related to, you know, you talked about data and the need to have organizations working together to, you know, make the infrastructure work. And my question is really about technologies and things of that sort. And the reason why I'm asking is that there seems to be this push towards using schema.org to advertise data and that sort of thing. And I was wondering if any of these groups are concerned or interested in that.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good question. So when we're talking about mostly the data providers that I'm dealing with are mostly government, and a lot of times, you know, they're providing kind of this authoritative hydrographic data, you know, base data set or foundational data set, and so the thing that has, I think, been a challenge always is everybody trying to find data and where to get it. And so that's where, you know, open type catalogs of information come in handy. And so there's, you know, been attempts at the national levels to try and establish these types of data catalogs and do all that in order to kind of make that data discoverable and discoverable by other systems as well. I personally haven't actually looked into schema.org or anything along those lines, so I'd certainly be, you know, interested in learning more about that, if that's kind of a more sort of broad user way to find the data sets that they're looking for. I think, you know, usually when you have the countries, they you know, want to maintain that kind of control of everything in terms of you know, the hosting of the data to the discovery of the data, but sometimes that's not the best way to actually find the data, right? So I think it's certainly worth you know, partnering with either more, you know, open type projects or other areas that are a little bit more sort of in the kind of open source or, you know, somewhat commercial sector to kind of get things a little bit more discoverable and get really a good technology base to catalog and help find that information.
Okay, so perhaps at some point we could talk about that, because I think that's part of performance element 9.4.2.
Thank you.
And I also note that it's very timely right at the moment, since there's a lot of activity, both Arctic and global and earth sciences in specific, to make that a goal with good requirements, etc. So
I have a question for the presenter, maybe for Mike. So the marine spatial data infrastructure, when I'm thinking, I put my BOEM hat on, I'm thinking about the interaction with our mission. And we don't do very much in terms of transportation, navigation. We're more in a planning mode. But one thing I saw in MSDI, I actually looked at that technical report beforehand, and it said something to the effect that, we're interested, or this information, this spatial data infrastructure can help assess or analyze natural resources. So maybe fishermen are interested in fish. In our context, we're interested in the impacts from oil and gas development or renewable energy in the OCS. So can you speak to that more natural resource side of things and how that's either used, how those stakeholders use the MSDI, or how the MSDI specifically geared to support that user group?
Sure. So you mentioned you're from BOEM, and something I'd like to highlight from there is marinecadastre.gov. I think that's actually a really great example of sort of a group of a number of different entities that are contributing information and making it discoverable and findable, and it's going, I guess, a little bit, more kind of out of just the sole charting type area and more into kind of things regarding like marine spatial planning and a few other types of themes of data. And so that's definitely a focus on kind of the IHO side, because we're primarily geared towards charting. We also have a lot of other people that show up to the table during the MSDI working group that are trying to, look at this from sort of a resource management side, and especially when it comes down to marine spatial planning. So actually one of the things that happened recently within IHO is that the MSDI working group was specifically supposed to restructure itself to look at marine spatial planning within their terms of reference. So there's definitely going to be a lot more focus on that, and along those lines with natural resource and the management of those resources as well. So you mentioned kind of the stakeholders and the people that use that type of information. That's the thing that I would, if I kind of speak sort of on behalf of all the other participants within the MSDI working group, that's been the hardest thing for everybody to try and figure out is what is it that people actually want to give. We create these authoritative data sources and we try and put them out there, and we try and put them out there in a format that we've got some feedback on. But it's very difficult to try and get a nice collective voice of that feedback. So that's why we run some of these projects to try and capture that, like the MSDI concept development study that I was talking about, and then and try and also go further with that and try and demo and get users in there to actually kind of start showing us, what it is that they're trying to find and what they're trying to look for. I guess when you have a broad user base, it's hard to get, that very unified answer about what that is that they need. But certainly, if marine, natural resources, I guess, both marine, terrestrial, wherever, is somewhat more of a need that needs to be addressed. We're trying to do that a little bit on the marine side, and then and I think also if you look into Arctic spatial data infrastructure in particular, because USGS would be their U.S. Representative, they're looking to try and provide that information as well, especially when they're looking at Arctic Council working groups like CAF and PAIM, who are very much concerned about the natural resources part of, or picture, I guess, within access for furthering their working group goals and objectives.
Right, and for the Arctic, at least the Arctic component, the Arctic is such a challenging research environment that these operational considerations, like on being able to navigate safely, do impact the science so much. And so that's been a common theme we've heard throughout from this group over the last few meetings is some of the efforts that the Arctic. Help me out, Bill Manley. You're part of that group, the ADIWG.
Alaska Data Integration Working Group. I'm not, but my colleague Allison Gaylord is.
Right. Thank you for the name, at least.
Sure.
ADIWG is focused on that operational aspect, and they're sharing like project information and so on to try to leverage the assets that are going out in the water or into different parts of the Arctic. So I think there, at least for the Arctic, this is a very central and pivotal consideration for the research community. And, as far as the broader marine realm applicability, there's like a user relationship to this charting, this maritime information, but it's not as critical as it is in the Arctic.
Yeah, and if I could just quickly piggyback onto that, there was, I guess, our Norwegian counterparts within both the Arctic Regional Hydrographic Commission and then also within the Arctic SDI. They led a user survey report a couple of years back, and that actually went out to the Arctic Council and told those working groups about the types of information that they do need with regards to natural resources, and so we've gotten a lot of feedback from them, and some of that is still, even though we have this great report and everything, it's trying to find out what are the actual data sets that will provide the information that they are looking for, especially here in the Arctic. So we've taken that and used that to try and guide the types of information that we're going to try and put out in the future and try and find and hone in on what kind of responds to that need for the mapping of natural resources.
So this is Mike. I just want to take this opportunity in this discussion to make the connection to the Environmental Intelligence Working Group that we support, or team that we support. And I would remind people and just kind of reflect on this a bit. I'm looking at these performance elements, and I've been on many of these calls, and I say there's a theme that there's a tendency to focus on data and models and systems. And oftentimes the human, the user, the social impact, those dimensions, which are equally complicated and challenging, especially when you're talking about decision support systems, they tend to get kind of overshadowed. So I just want to kind of put that out there as a potential theme going forward to really try to emphasize user engagement, co-production methods, and areas where improvements can be made, and maybe kind of looking at these performance elements in terms of the end state, which is really it's not data-centric. That's not the end state. The end is really having the societal impact and supporting decisions. So looking at data centricity, developing the systems, developing models as kind of a step towards supporting eventual decision influence outcomes and other types of decision support, and then keeping that in mind. So involving the user into the process so we enhance usability and enhance effectiveness and uptake and all this. And this is a growing theme throughout the scientific community, is especially in the Arctic, is enhancing actionability of not only information but science, knowledge. I think this is something that we can expand on. I appreciate Sebastian coming in and kickstarting this conversation, and I'd like to hear that there's this kind of general shift towards engaging user communities. I'd love to discuss more about the results, the survey methods, the process of and what worked, what the kinds of stakeholders provided input, and ideas for proactively going out and bringing in the user community. I see this forum, this IARPIC forum, as a good way to bridge kind of get across those barriers, meet new people. Oftentimes stovepipe happenings, even with, among working groups that do similar things. That's another question I would have for you, but I know we're running out of time. Is your experience? Are your working groups aligning? And clearly there are going to be similar activities, and then you get into the cultural aspect of things where perceptions of working with the government and keeping it kind of purely scientific. These are old debates, and unfortunately, we all have to work together if we're going to have actionable environmental intelligence.
Will there be an organic flow of interaction?
Speak up, microphone, Tim.
Yes, I'm just wondering, I know we're short of time, but my main concern was, will there be an organic groundswell of synergy between these groups?
Right.
To answer the question that you asked, which is, what do they need?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is Ruth. I am pleased and surprised to hear you guys saying this. I worked with the Exchange for Local Observations and Knowledge of the Arctic for a good many years. And one of the biggest issues that we always had was, how does one actually make it feasible to have communities directly represented? Because typically developing relationships takes a really long time, and grant cycles are very short. For example, there's been a lot of efforts to try and bring the communities in Alaska and elsewhere around the Arctic into these kinds of meetings, etc. But these things tend to be all volunteer unless you happen to work for an agency. So bringing people to the table physically has been financially challenging. I think there's plenty of willing participants, but actually being able to fund them to attend has been like pulling teeth. Because for some reason, nobody understands that, just general people aren't going to go, spend money to go to a meeting. You have to meet them where they're at, or make sure they can get to where you are having your meeting.
And I think, says Mike, I think emphasizing the importance of user engagement, if you're going to have good outcomes, you have to invest and they have to build capacity and get beyond looking at the data, the systems, and the models, and really emphasizing that facilitated interaction. And I think that until we figure out the importance, in the end, societal impact depends on user engagement. We really need to flip our models and then really incentivize those stakeholder user interactions. So I know we're really running out of time, Kelly. How do you want to handle this? We got 3 minutes.
Yeah, so Bill has a question. Bill, if it's really quick.
It's pretty quick. So first off, I wanted to say, I think user needs should drive technology, not the other way around. And I wanted to say kudos to you all for your work on marine spatial data infrastructures and SDIs in general. I would totally agree that, a lot of the interoperability piece, making it data, especially geospatial data, findable, accessible, and interoperable, depends on these data and metadata interoperable standards underneath. And so one question I have, if you have time, is with ASDI, is there a process, who decides which data layers are compiled and shown in ASDI?
Yeah, sorry, you're referring to Arctic SDI? Is that correct?
Arctic SDI.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a good question. That I would have to, because I'm not actually in Arctic SDI. I'm in like the marine group that works with them. They would definitely be able to better answer that. But from what I do know, the one thing that I mentioned about the user survey report, the Norwegian user survey report that they were able to use to kind of address what types of information went in there, so that that's them reaching out to the users in order to get an understanding of what it is that they're trying to show. Additionally, just a couple of years back, they ran the Arctic Spatial Data Pilot, which was a OGC initiative as well. So I would, and that's where they tried to do some user engagement as well. And I think those types of initiatives are the things that they kind of use to try and define what to actually provide. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you all. We gotta close at 2. So John, do you want to give a 30-second update on where next meetings?
Sure.
And then we're gonna get cut off here.
We have the next 2 meetings tentatively planned. The next one for February will be at the end of February and focus on just this very question we're talking about here at the end of the meeting about user engagement, measuring data use, and I'm going to wrap that in the context of Action 5, the Federal Data Action Plan, which I've talked about in the past. And so stay tuned for an invite for that. This, in 2 months, on March 18th, we're switching up the date. We're going to be meeting jointly with the, is it the coastal, which team are we meeting with jointly?
Arctic Observing Team.
Arctic Observing Team, right. And so we'll stay tuned for the invite for that meeting, but we've got a great agenda planned. We might ask Peter Pulsifer to come back for the Arctic Observing meeting to present some of his international work. And so please come back in the next couple months, and thank you for attending today.
Okay, thank you all. MGA closing out, getting kicked out here. Thank you, everyone. Looking forward to future meetings.
Thanks, Mike. See you later.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.
So the next one's February 27th?
Provide the link to all of the content in the notes.
And the next meeting is February 27th?
That sounds right, yes.
Okay, great. That's the one up on the website.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bill.
Bye.
Bye.